I'm sitting here in the gate that facing the valley of Elah. I'm sure that when King David came from Jerusalem every few months to this region to supervise the kingdom and to see how things are going, he entered and came out of the city from this gate. So we are really here. We are really in the footsteps of King David. And it's not a metaphor. This is exactly where King David came in and out when he came to the city of Sha'araim. What can we really say about King David? The Bible talks a lot about King David. And I think that this is because he was the founded father of the dynasty. And in the ancient Near East, when a king sitting on his throne and in the royal, what he is writing on the royal inscription, I sat on my father's throne. We have nearly 2 books in the Bible that describe the action of David. Why David was so important for biblical historiography? This is because he was the founded father of the Jerusalem dynasty. In the ancient Near East, when we see royal inscriptions, the king said, I sit on my father's throne. My father was a king, so it's legitimate that I will be a king too. So in the dynasty of Jerusalem, there were 22 kings. Each king related himself to David. So Solomon said, I am a king because of David. He was my father. And then Rehoboam said, I am a king because David was my grandfather. And so each one of these kings related himself to David. This was the legitimacy to become a king. And I think that over time, David, which was a small figure in the beginning, from generation to generation, more and more stories has been added, and he became bigger than life. And now the question from a scholarly point of view, what can we really say about the historical King David? And I think that in the Bible we can see 2 phases in King David. First, before he was a king, we can see how he was moving in the valley of Elah, in Ziklag, in other places like Carmel and Maon, and Gedi. All these places are located one day walk from Hebron. So really this is the area of that was under control by David before he was king, but this was his territory. This is where he was wandering around as a young person. Maybe outlaw, because he's also described as an outlaw in the biblical text. But once he became a king, all this has been changed. First he was in Hebron, but he moved to Jerusalem very soon and started building fortified cities like Haifa, Bet Shemesh, and Tel Natzbi. And I think that David moved from Hebron to Jerusalem because he was looking at the north and he wanted to be a king also on the northern part of Israel. I'm not sure that if he was a real king or it was only a wishful thinking to become a king of the north. And why I'm saying this? Because we don't have any evidence about David in the northern kingdom of Israel. All our data comes only here from Judah. So I'm not sure that David indeed controlled the north, but I'm sure that he would like, this was a wishful thinking that maybe enter into the literature, that he wanted to become a king of the north, even if he was not a king of the north. But there was a kingdom in Judah that controlled by David. And this is clear from our excavations. Till the 1980s, scholars accepted the biblical tradition as representing accurate historical memories. And if we have a nice description of Solomon Palace and Solomon Temple, scholars believe that this was taken from the architect note and integrated into the biblical text. But about 40 years ago, new approaches have been developed, first in Copenhagen, but then in other places all over the world. And people start saying, well, when the biblical text has been written, and some of them said only in the Hellenistic or Persian period, so hundreds and hundreds of years after the time of David and Solomon. And the conclusion was that David is a mythological figure, he never existed. Solomon is a mythological figure, a temple was never built in Jerusalem, and so on. And then a horrible debate started about how much history is embedded in the Hebrew Bible. Some people would say 100%, and some people would like to say 0%. And since the 1980s, till we start our excavations here in Khibet Kayafa, there was no clear archaeological level in Judah from the 10th century BC. So it really looks like as if the minimalist approach is the right one. And I think that hundreds or even thousands of biblical scholars, historians, and scholars of the ancient Near East believe that indeed the biblical tradition has no historical value. Even when we just started the excavation here, there was a big article that was published and 400 radiocarbon dating were published from various sites from the Iron Age, and all of them said that urbanism started here in Israel in the 9th century BC. So it really looked like the Bible can be taken out of the library of historical book and put in the library of theological books, but no history is embedded in the biblical text. This site here changed everything. This site, for the first time in the archaeology of Israel, we have a level from the time of King David. This was proven by radiometric dating. And I remember when we just published the first date, some scholars said, we have 400 dates that said everything started in the 9th century BC. So how come your date changed the picture? And I would like to answer them, it was one stone was enough to kill Goliath. But the point is that when you check where all these 400 samples were taken from, they were taken from site in the kingdom of Israel. Even one radiometric date was not from the kingdom of Judah. And indeed, according to the Bible, Israel became a kingdom only in the 9th century BC. So what was taken as a proof that the Bible is wrong is actually proving the Bible. People dated the kingdom of Israel, and indeed, it flourished in the 9th century and later 8th centuries BC. But Judah started in the 10th century BC, and we are here in Khirbet Kayafa supply the first evidence. Later, we excavated Khirbet el-Rai, where we have another level from the time of King David, not a fortified city, only a village, and again the dating were 1000 BC. And later I went to Lachish, we excavated in Lachish, we found a city wall which was not known before. We sent olive pit for radiometric dating, and we get result in the end of the 10th century BC, not the early one, the later part of the 10th century BC. And indeed, according to the biblical tradition, Lachish was fortified by Rehoboam, which ruled in the later part of the 10th century BC. So we can see that radiometric dating from Khirbet Kayafa, Khirbet el-Rai, and Tel Lachish, all of them supporting biblical traditions. When we are looking at the minimalist movement, we can see three phases in the evolution of these approaches. The first claim was that the Bible was written very late, hundreds of years later, so everything is mythological. But then in 1993, in Tel Dan, a royal inscription written probably by Hazael, king of Aram Damascus, and the inscription is written in Aramaic. It mentions that this king killed 70 kings, and he killed a king from Israel and a king from the house of David. So house of David, it means dynasty created by David. And from this moment onward, David became historical figure according to archaeology, not just according to the biblical text. So the minimalist approach that everything is mythological collapsed. A few years later came the idea that, okay, there was somebody called David, but he was just a Bedouin sheikh living in a small tent in Jerusalem. So there was no kingdom, no fortified cities, no writing, and no administrations. But when we excavated here in Khirbet Kayafa, and we found a fortified city, and we found inscriptions, and we found evidence for administration, and metallurgical object, and many other things, and radiocarbon dating shows that this is indeed 1000 BC. So now it's clear there was somebody called David, he created a dynasty, and his kingdom was here in the area of Judah with fortified cities like Khirbet Kayafa. Why Khirbet Kayafa is such an important site? We need to understand the context of our discoveries. Before this site was excavated, even one level was not found in the archaeology of Israel from the time of King David. In Jerusalem, we have no level from the time of King David or from Solomon. And this cast heavy doubt about the biblical tradition. And people start asking how much history is embedded in the biblical text, and specifically how much is embedded in the stories of the 10th century BC. And many scholars suggested that the biblical history starting only with the Achav dynasty in Samaria, and all the earlier part of the Bible are complete mythological stories. So David is a mythology, Solomon is a mythology, Rehoboam is a mythology, and all these things never happened. Here in Khirbet Kayafa, for the first time, it was possible to prove that indeed there was a kingdom in Judah in the early 10th century BC, as that in this kingdom, as there were fortified cities, like here, the city of Khirbet Kayafa. Now it's also very clear that similar cities existed also in Bet Shemesh and also in Tel Natzbe. So you can see that slowly, it's possible to put content into this idea of a David kingdom. Another aspect that is extremely important are the two inscriptions which were found here at Khirbet Kayafa. This inscription telling us that it was known how to read and write in this period, and that historical memories could be documented and preserved from generation to generation. So one of the main arguments of the minimalist movement that there was no historical knowledge, everything was invented later in the 7th century or the Persian or Hellenistic period. The inscriptions which were found here in this site prove that writing was known in Judah at the time. So what was the function of Khirbet Kayafa? The geography and the geopolitical situation here explain this question. We are here sitting on the valley of Elah, the main road leading from the west, from the coastal plain, into the east, into Jerusalem, Hebron, and Bethlehem. And we are also on the border. Here we are in Judah, and further to the west, we have the territory of the Philistines. So the site sitting on the border and where a main road cutting through the border. So it's really a post that protecting the entrance to the kingdom of Judah here in the valley of Elah.